Phil Town manages over $120 million in the Rule 1 Fund, and I'm going to tell him how he can do better.
You serious?
This is a form Phil Town filed with the SEC giving his business experience when he started his hedge fund, and these are the dates he said he started his businesses. Except these are the actual dates he started his business according to the Secretary of State database. But that's nothing compared to what I'm about to show you later in this video. Like why this is wrong, like why this right here is wrong, also why this is wrong, and of course what Phil Town's actual returns are. But first, I have to give you $100,000. Let's pretend I magically became Mr. Beast and just gave you $100,000 on my game show video. But there's a catch. You must invest $100,000 for 3 years before you can keep it, and there's only 2 ways I'll allow you to invest it. You can either choose to have that $100,000 grow at 10% every single year, or you can take option 2, which is your $100,000 will grow 10% in the first year, you'll lose 20% in the second year, and then you'll gain 40% in the next year. Which option do you choose? Scott, play game show music. To decide which option to choose, some people would look at the average annual return. The average annual return of each of these 2 options is 10%. But here's the kicker. Option A will give you $9,900 more dollars if you go with that option. But why is it that the average annual returns are the same, even though option A will give you more money? And what's this got to do with Phil Town? Average annual rates of returns ignore the time value of money. For example, I could have come up with all these different options that also have an average annual rate of return of 10%, but give you completely different amounts of money had you invested $100,000 into them, and therefore a different true return. It's not that the math is wrong, it's that average annual rates of return, because they ignore the time value of money, are not comparable to one another, making the average annual rate of return more useless to us than the rug that'll never get dirty.
So the next time you arrive home and your shoes are absolutely filthy, have the peace of mind knowing you can still walk across your rug and not get it dirty whatsoever.
Looking at the latest Rule 1 Fund report, which is the prospectus, you'll find these average annual rates of return, which, as investors looking to figure out what the performance is, I would ignore completely. And I'd also recommend Phil Town remove them from all of his reports. This concept that averaging ignores the time value of money is the same reason why the average share method that you see him calculate returns with here is also wrong. Open-ended mutual funds increase their share count anytime people invest into them. In other words, it's a way for us to track deposits and withdrawals into or out of the Rule 1 Fund. Just like before, here are examples of investments with the same returns according to this average share method. They all have the same beginning balance, the same ending balance, and the same total deposits. The only thing I'm changing are when the deposits are made. And you can use shares or dollars in this example interchangeably, it doesn't matter. The overarching principle here is that they all have the same returns according to the average share method, and it's because it ignores the time value of money. If we include for that factor and find the true performance, you'll see that the actual rates of return are more like this. And if that's got you confused and seeing numbers fly through the air, that's okay, it's confusing math. But the concept is really simple to us. The best investor doesn't need a lot of money in the very beginning to make the same amount of dollar gains. They'll make it up in percentage gains. Conversely, the worst investor is going to need a lot of money up front because they need to make a smaller percentage gain to make the same dollar gain. Another way to think about this is to imagine your life was on the line and you had to make a $10 gain using $100. Wouldn't you rather the $100 up front so you can have that time to compound rather than having $10 every single month for 10 months? I mean, just think about how much shorter of a time period that last $10 had to compound versus that first $10 you were given in that second example. The rate of return I used, the internal rate of return, is the return you want to use because it adjusts for that time value of money, which is why all the returns that you saw actually logically make sense. The ones that had the money much earlier on had a much lower return. And the ones with the money much later on had a much higher return because they had to catch up. What you wouldn't want to do is use something like total return, because it also ignores the time value of money and makes returns not comparable to one another. And I won't go into the details on that one because we've already covered total return completely in a separate video, which is linked in the description, but I think you get the point. The unfortunate conclusion to everything we just talked about is that you can't use any of the performances from any of the reports to figure out the true performance of the Rule 1 fund. So where do we go from here? All right, so here's the deal. I haven't known Phil Town for very long, but I want to do him justice here. And that's because after watching all his YouTube videos and seeing the support he receives from his over 400,000 subscribers on YouTube, including the people I really look up to, I know Phil Town isn't just some run-of-the-mill investor. In fact, there's a lot about investing that he teaches the people that I really admire. In my mind, positivity beats out negativity every time, and we never want to be a symbol of exposing or hurting anybody. Instead, we want to highlight what's good and show how we can improve to deliver more value to our audiences. I know Phil Town's doing excellent things for wonderful people, and we want to be the accelerant, not the retardant, which is why I spent over 50 hours piecing together my best guess at Phil Town's returns. Unfortunately, we don't have enough information to do it perfectly, so it took fighting fire with fire, and it's not going to be perfect, but it'll be much cleaner. And after I show you my best guess at Phil Town's true performance, I'm going to show you how Phil Town can improve to best calculate and communicate his performances so he can deliver the most value to his audience. To get a true comparable return, what we need to do is create a table that has exactly when and exactly how much money went into or out of the Rule 1 fund. We aren't given this information, so the next best thing for us to do is get as close as we possibly can to what actually happened. So we have to look at what we are given, and what we're given is the exact how much, but we're not given the exact dates. Instead, we get a date range. And to illustrate what we're given, I created this chart. So our goal with the information we're given is to break it up and try to get something as close to this as possible, because it's going to confine the contributions and withdrawals in as short of a time range as possible. Once we have something like this, then begs the question, how do we know which exact date to put contributions and withdrawals into? And without getting into the nitty-gritty, because I think it's too much for this video, it's a pretty easy solution. All you have to do is put the contributions at the beginning of the time frame and the withdrawals at the end, and this will give us the most conservative guess at his rate of return. After all this work and all this time spent, this is the table that I believe is the closest to the Rule 1 fund's transaction history. And now I'm going to tell you what the Rule 1 fund's performance is according to this table. From June 3rd, 2019 to December 31st, 2020, the Rule 1 fund made on a pre-tax internal rate of return basis 18.45% or 11.30% annualized. And before you go asking yourself whether this is good or bad, I saved the best part for last, because I took that transaction history we came up with and simulated what would have happened if the Rule 1 fund just took all the funds and invested it into the Dow Jones Industrial Average with dividends reinvested. Turns out they would have had 21.5% gain rather than the 18.45% that they made investing on their own. Which means I'm claiming that the Rule 1 fund underperformed the Dow Jones Industrial Average, but there's more to the story. The reason why Phil Town names all of his businesses with the Rule 1 prefix is because of this Warren Buffett quote.
The first rule in investment is don't lose. And the second rule in investment is don't forget the first rule.
So Phil Town isn't even benchmarking against any of the indexes. Instead, he just wants to make positive returns every year, even in down markets. But then you might ask yourself, why did I go through all this trouble trying to figure out what the actual and comparable return is of the Rule 1 fund if he's not even comparing it to a benchmark? And that's because I only found out his purpose after I did all the work. No, I'm just kidding. There's actually real reasons why we'd want to do that. First of all is, if you're not using actual returns, you can actually hide negative results. So we do want to get the true performance is. And then there's also the fact that just because he's not benchmarking it doesn't mean that we don't want to. For example, what if I was deciding the best place to put my money with that same mission in mind? I might choose the Rule 1 fund, or I might choose someone like Kernan Gurnani who's doing something on eToro where I can copy his investments with the same mission. So yeah, I still want to have comparable results. Even if you only want to find positive returns and you only want to go with the Rule 1 fund, you still have to make sure they're real returns, meaning they have to beat inflation, which means they still have to be relational. Everything in finance is relational. One thing I'd like people to consider is the fact that this Rule 1 fund is still very new, having only been in inception since June 3rd, 2019, or even June 29th, 2019 if you count the time of his first investment. Personally, if I wanted to know Phil Town's actual investment prowess, I'd try to find the investment returns of anything earlier on and for as long as possible. He's got many businesses, so there should be something there. Unfortunately, for this video, I wasn't able to find that information because it seemed like the only way for me to obtain that is if I were an accredited investor and I were to sign up for some kind of software that'll allow me to look at that. And I'm not an accredited investor yet, although I'll soon be one. Lastly, a huge shout out goes to stock compounder Brad Kellner, who recommended to us to do this video. It was definitely one of our most difficult tasks, but I think it was well worth it, and you should definitely subscribe to his channel if you haven't already. All of our math, our sources, and corrections are linked in the description or the comment section if I have to spill over. But thank you so much, Brad, for pushing us, Scott for editing this beast of a video, you all for watching, and until next time.